Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in New York for the 77th General Assembly of the United Nations. Mr. Trudeau arrived in the U.S. late Monday after a long day that included attending the London funeral of Queen Elizabeth. The Prime Minister's UN agenda included talks about climate change, gender equality, and sustainable development. Secretary General Antonio Guterres says this year's gathering will be seized with an urgent sense of crisis. The war in Ukraine is sure to be top of discussion when it comes to the economy and food security. Well, joining us now to discuss the 77th UN General Assembly and Canada's role is Ms. Jamie Webbe, President of the United Nations Association in Canada. Ms. Webbe, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what do we see so far on the opening day of the General Assembly's high-level meeting?
Actually, a really negative tone. So normally when the General Assembly comes together, we're celebrating everything we've achieved over the past year and looking at the accomplishments of the global community. But this year it's been very down. We've heard a lot of warnings, red flags raised on the environment, on security. And Antonio Guterres has made it very clear, we are in a time of crisis.
A lot to discuss on the docket today and in the coming days. Now, considering this is the first entirely in-person General Assembly meeting since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, what sort of impact had the pandemic had on the working of the United Nations?
Well, certainly it made everything more complicated. The UN can't just pick up and leave because of a pandemic, but it did make delivery of programs more expensive, more complicated. And in terms of the global process in the General Assembly, I think in a way it almost loosened accountability when you're not facing people in the same room, but rather across a computer screen or via email. People tend to be less accommodating and less able to find consensus. And that's certainly what we've heard from a lot of the international meetings that have gone virtual, is that people have said it's just harder to find consensus.
All right. Well, in terms of what's going to be discussed, Russia's war with Ukraine is expected to be a hot topic, especially around its impact on food security. So how is Canada helping to address food security in particular?
Canada is one of the biggest contributors to the World Food Program and continues to maintain that role, and expect we're going to see that continuing. What's a bit challenging, though, is looking at the political context for some of these discussions, especially around food security and the war in Ukraine, and how that is reflected in some of Canada's other political positions in food crisis, including in Ethiopia, with the Tigray conflict going on there, which has largely remained out of the news, but is a significant contributor to food insecurity in the Horn of Africa.
And in terms of the focus of this year's meeting, we know it's going to be for shared cooperation among all the nations. But what are some realistic steps that the international community can take for this to happen?
Well, what we're seeing is a lot of discussion around online misinformation, digital access, digital extremism. So I think we're probably going to see, in terms of concrete actions, some resolutions and some calls for greater coordination in terms of the digital space, the digital age, online sharing of information. So I expect that is quite an easy nexus for the world to come together on right now. What's going to be more challenging are issues like the report that came out on China's treatment of the Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. And that's certainly one of those consensus issues going into this year's General Assembly.
All right, about a little over a minute left here, Ms. Webbe, but what else can be expected at the General Assembly in the coming days?
Well, there's a big side event that's happening on education and the future of education. What I'm hoping is that we'll see some progress from Canada on the implementation of Article 14 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which specifically refers to the rights of Indigenous peoples to be educated in their own language and according to their own culture. And I do hope that Canada is going to come up really strong in leading on this issue, and leading by example, by really supporting the reconciliation process here in Canada through looking at the future of education for our Indigenous communities.
All right, Ms. Jamie Webbe, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at the major news stories and headlines from around the world. Authorities in Tigray say Eritrea has launched a military offensive against them. Sweden's central bank raises its interest rate, and Hurricane Fiona hits the Turks and Caicos Islands. We'll have these stories and more after the break, so stay with us. Forum Daily will return in a moment.